To me, this place captures the essential paradox of Africa's location. You know, it's the most central of all the continents of the world. Not far from here, the equator cuts the African continent into two almost equal halves. No other region of the world is traversed by the equator in quite that manner. In fact, of all the African countries I've been to, this is the only one which seems to take seriously Kwame Nkrumah's maxim that socialism without science is void.
Hi. The Center for African Research and Studies at the International University of Africa in Khartoum, Sudan, is organizing a conference on the legacy and contribution of Professor Ali Mazroui. The organizers have so far received more than 50 abstracts, which hopefully will cover all aspects of his contribution to the mankind knowledge. So in this particular show, we are going to confine ourselves on one of his greatest, in my opinion, contributions, the documentary, the TV documentary, which he named The Africans' Triple Heritage. So we are going just to indicate or just to show some clips of that very famous, very important documentary on African culture, on African civilizations. And we will leave the rest for the upcoming conference, which will be held in the first week of January 2019. But before that, we would like also to make a very brief profile of Ali Mazroui. Professor Ali Mazroui is a Kenyan national. He was born in Mombasa, Kenya in February 1933. He passed away in October 2014 in the United States of America, and he was buried according to his will at his hometown, Mombasa, Kenya. Ali Mazroui finished his general education in his hometown there. He got his BA from University of Manchester in United Kingdom of Great Britain. He got his master's degree in 1961 from Columbia University in New York City, and he obtained his doctorate from University of Oxford, again in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. He started after that his career as a political science professor in University of Makerere in Uganda, before he migrated after that to the United States of America. Ali Mazroui was heavily influenced by Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah of independent Ghana, and he remained very faithful to Pan-Africanism, which propagated from the beginning by Prime Minister Nkrumah of Ghana, who considered one of the founding fathers of this continent of Africa. So based on this, he compiled this documentary, this TV documentary, which is produced jointly by the PPS in the United States, public broadcasting service in the United States of America, jointly with the BBC of Great Britain. And the documentary was broadcasted in 1986 simultaneously around the world in about 6 parts, which we are going to focus on in this particular show. By a triple heritage, Professor Mazroui, referring to the African values and Arabic Islamic values and the Western culture and values. So these three parts together became or contributed to what we today call the identity of Africa. Ali Mazroui himself was a product of this triple heritage. His paternal descendants came from Arabia in the Gulf area, where even today you will find the name Mazroui is a very common name in many places in the Gulf area, in Oman, in the United Arab Emirates, in Doha, Qatar, maybe also in Bahrain and the eastern part of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It is very, very well known today, to the degree that Sultan Qasim of the Emir of the Sharqa Emirates authored a book on Mazari in 1980s, and that was also published in parts by the Saudi magazine Sharq al-Awsat at that time. So he himself, and he used to speak Arabic, Swahili, and English. So he himself was a testimony to this terrible heritage of Africa. This is why he was very keen to bring all Africans together. He taught for a number of years. I think he spent about 40 years teaching in the United States, at the beginning at the University of Michigan, and then in New York as the Binghamton University in the state of New York. And he established what he called the Afro-American Institute at the University of Michigan at that time, and he encouraged African American to relate themselves to their mother continent, Africa. Ali Mazroui, named among the top intellectuals worldwide in 2004 by the reputable American magazine, Foreign Policy. And he, as an academic professor, he authored or co-authored more than 20 books, and also he published more than 100 academic articles in different journals in the United States and in the world. On his series, this TV, so as I said, the rest of it will be left to the conference to discuss thoroughly. But now we are going just to mention to some of these series. In the first part of his series, The Africans, a Triple Heritage, he named that the first episode, he called it The Garden of Eden in Decay, talking about how Africa came to existence in the first place, and how it was named, and why is it now in decay. He attributed many reasons. He ascribed the trails of this decay in many ways. He talked about the climatic dimension, also the erroneous setting of priorities by the founding father of Africa. Now you can see here, he talked about in comparison between Africa and Europe, he said that Africa, he used the famous idiom that if necessity is the mother, he said necessity is the mother of invention, abundance is the mother of inertia, saying that, telling about Europe that, which has a very harsh 6 or 7 months winters, necessitated upon Europeans to invention, to invent housing, how to build houses, how to wear clothes, how to wear shoes. While in Africa, he also mentioned a proverb in East Africa saying that the soil is very much fertile to the degree that if you stick your finger in the soil, your nail will grow. And he mentioned, look, you can watch now this part in which we made this comparison between Africa and how the harsh weather, the harsh winter in Africa necessitated invention, while the abundance of food in Africa did not necessitate any kind of invention for Africa. So you can watch this.
Hello there, Houston. We're reading you loud and clear, and we're coming up on Africa now, and we're looking for some thunderstorms.
Africa is the most tropical of all continents. Yet that is precisely why tropical Africa will be the last to launch its own spacecraft. Climate was the first cause of Africa's technological slowness. Foreign invasions were the second. The third cause is independent Africa's failure to correct the distortions. This program is about how climate, colonization, and our own poor judgment have retarded Africa's economic takeoff, frustrating our own attempts at development. It all began with nature's bounty, which helped to make tropical Africa a Garden of Eden. There's a joke in East Africa about the soil being so fertile that if you dig your finger into it, your fingernail will begin to grow. But if necessity is the mother of invention, abundance is the mother of inertia. Where nature is so bountiful, why should man in equatorial Zaire need advanced innovation? But what have winter and snow got to do with development? Because of winter in the West, wearing clothes is not just a matter of sexual modesty. It's a matter of physical survival. Wearing shoes is not just a matter of social etiquette. It's a matter of avoiding frostbite. Now contrast this with our situation in tropical Africa. I grew up in Mombasa and I was running around barefoot. I played football barefoot. There was no such fear as frostbite. And there are societies in Africa that don't wear anything at all. They walk naked and proud. They can afford the luxury of being natural. But there has been a heavy cost in technology and in economic development. Where the winds are cold, thicker walls are erected. Engineering begins to advance. Where warmth is a matter of life and death, fire is tamed and harnessed. Where the growing season is short, survival depends on planning for winter.
Hi again. I would like to mention that Mazrou'i has a good book, a companion book to his documentary, which carries the same name, The Africans, A Triple Heritage. It's worth reading because it has so many details which you will not find in the TV series. Of course, you know the limitations of TV in these matters. When we compare between what Professor Mazroui said about Africa and Europe, he also mentioned in the second part about exploitation of Europeans of the natural resources in Africa. He of course mentioned that Africa is the birthplace of mankind. He brought it from some, of course it is very well known that the oldest human fossils found in parts of Ethiopia as well as in Kenya. So the first man ever started from this continent of Africa. And by the way, the American journalist Paul Salvovic has been doing for the last 2 years, still doing a huge project showing how the first man originated in Africa and how he took so many routes to get out of this cities. That's jointly by the National Geographic and the Chicago Tribune daily newspaper, which I think it will make a very big bang about Africa and Africans in the upcoming years. So Mazroui went there also talk about how the birthplace of humanity, of mankind, was here in this continent of Africa. About exploitations, he mentioned that the ancient Congolian people used to determine whether a certain part of their land is rich with the mineral of copper by smelling the building made by the termite insect. And he showed how now the modern ways of excavation has destroyed many of the places in Africa. Watch, he said, you will find this here. This is according to a theory in the social sciences about development from the bottom, that it is better to upgrade, to try to develop the very maybe primitive ways of making things, rather than to impose or rather to try to make shortcuts to this. Japan went through this, of course. Japan never been occupied, never been colonized. Just for once after the Second World War, it was occupied by the Americans for some times. But before that, they developed themselves according to their own culture. So please watch this part here.
Many centuries ago, man in this part of Africa went into partnership with termites to process copper. The Balunda, the Baluba, the Basanga of ancient Zaire used the clay produced by termites to help smelt copper and produce implements of agriculture, weapons of war, sometimes decorations, and money for exchange. A long, long time ago, a strange partnership. And then the Europeans came. Did they want to learn from the technology they found here? Oh no. At least the Baluba and the Balunda had consulted the technology of the termites and benefited from it. But European technology was more arrogant, more self-confident, less compromising. It abolished the old technological order, and in its wake, it left new forms of desolation in Africa.
Well, this is the part which we are going to show now is the most important part of the series because it is embodied all his thoughts on the Pan-Africanisms. In this part, he's talking specifically about what he meant by a triple heritage. He talked about how these three parts, the African values, the Arabic Islamic, and also the European Western culture impacted the African identity. In this part, he was talking about the contribution of Arabic and Islamic culture to the continent. He said specifically that it gave the Africans a sense of direction and in time because they need to pray 5 times a day towards the holy city of Mecca in Arabia, and they have also to fix their time accordingly because the 5 prayers a day, each one of them has its own time. So this is something new to the African. He said the impact of the Islamic culture gave the continent the sense of direction, the sense of time. European or Western cultures, of course, brought so many, it has a very strong impact on Africans. And he said this happened in a very short span of time compared to what Islam slowly has been affecting the Africans for almost 1,000 years. But he was very critical here, talking about that the Western culture, because it has this component of colonizations and of exploitation, left behind just the taste and superficial appearance of the Africans, rather than leaving behind skills of making things, of innovations. So this is why I think that this is very important, because it embodied everything he was talking about in the 5 previous parts of his of this documentary. This is very important. It should be watched carefully in order to get in a nutshell what he meant by a triple heritage. Thank you very much.
On Africa's eastern seaboard, conquerors have risen and fallen, and some have left their mark. Often the Western impact is the most obvious, but don't be deceived. Islam was affecting African values 1,000 years before European colonialism. A legacy of different lifestyles was evolving. The ocean winds brought to Africa new gods, new goods, new games. At Fort Jesus in Mombasa, I played football as a child. Once my own family ruled Mombasa from this very fort. Fort Jesus was built by the Portuguese, conquered by the Arabs, and then by the British. Our dynasty lasted about a century. We were part of the historical saga of a seaport. As I grew up, history transmitted its messages in more than one language. My mother tongue was Kiswahili, but at school in colonial Kenya, we were taught in English. And the muezzin summoned believers to the mosque in the language of worship, Arabic. When I lived in this house, the muezzin was a neighborhood muezzin. He didn't just call believers to prayer from a minaret. He actually came to this window, shouting at 5 o'clock in the morning, prayer, prayer. Prayer is better than sleep. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Hundreds of times I prayed here. The mosque was both a temple of solemn worship and an academy of sacred scholarship. The place still has echoes of more than 1,000 years of Muslim learning. The geography of my birth made me a walking example of 3 cultures, Africa's triple heritage: traditional Africa, Islam, and the West. To pursue one of those civilizations, I took a train from Mombasa in 1955 on the first leg of my journey to study and later teach in the West.